At my baby shower, my parents arranged the whole event and then my sister volunteered to prepare the cake. As we arrived at the event and began to cut the cake, my daughter grabbed my hand and whispered, "Don't eat the cake." She looked pale. My sister made this cake. She was smiling brightly at me from across the room. My parents knowingly said, "Come on, eat that cake," while taking my daughter away from me. Dad added, "Some children just don't know what's good for them." Mom agreed, "Finally someone made a special cake just for you." I listened to my daughter and didn't eat it. 15 minutes later, police were knocking on the door. You know how they say blood is thicker than water? Well, sometimes that blood is poisoned, and the water is what keeps you alive. I learned this the hard way at what should have been one of the happiest days of my life. My name is Anna, and this is the story of how my own family tried to destroy me, and how I made them pay for it in ways they never saw coming. It all started 6 months ago when I announced I was pregnant with my second child. My husband Ben and I had been trying for years to give our 8-year-old daughter Zoe a sibling. When we finally got that positive test, we were over the moon. Zoe was especially excited about becoming a big sister. But my family's reaction was different. My parents, James and Susan, barely managed forced smiles. My sister Nicole just stared at me with this weird expression I couldn't quite read. The room went uncomfortably quiet until my mom finally said, "Well, that's unexpected news. See, there's some context you need to understand about my family dynamics. Nicole and I have never gotten along, but things got exponentially worse after our grandmother died 3 years ago. Grandma Rose had always been the family matriarch, the one person who could keep everyone in line. She'd left her entire estate to me in her will, including the beautiful Victorian house I now lived in with Ben and Zoe, and a substantial trust fund that had set us up comfortably for life. Nicole had expected to inherit everything, being the older sister by 2 years. She'd always been my parents' golden child, the one who could do no wrong. When she found out about the will, she'd screamed at me that I'd manipulated a sick old woman. My parents had taken her side, naturally, claiming I'd stolen Nicole's rightful inheritance. The truth was simpler and more painful. Grandma Rose had seen how Nicole treated me over the years. She'd witnessed the subtle cruelty, the way Nicole would undermine me at family gatherings, the backhanded comments disguised as sisterly concern. Grandma had told me once, near the end, that she was leaving me everything because she knew I had a good heart and would use the money wisely, not selfishly. What Nicole didn't understand about inheritance law was crucial to her flawed plan. She seemed to believe that if something happened to me, the inheritance would automatically pass to her as my sister. But that's not how it works. Since Ben and I were married, everything would go to him and Zoe first. Nicole would only inherit if Ben, Zoe, and I all died, which wasn't part of her plan. Nicole never forgave me for that inheritance. Neither did my parents. So when I announced my pregnancy, I should have expected their lukewarm response. What I didn't expect was what came next. Over the following months, they suddenly became incredibly involved in my pregnancy. Mom would call daily to check on me, offering to help with everything. Dad would stop by the house with groceries and baby supplies. Nicole, who hadn't spoken to me in months, suddenly wanted to take me shopping for maternity clothes and baby furniture. I was cautiously optimistic. Maybe the prospect of a new grandchild had healed some of the family wounds. Maybe they were finally ready to move past the inheritance drama. Ben was skeptical, but I convinced him that people could change, that becoming grandparents again might have shifted their perspective. How naive I was. The red flags started small. Nicole would make comments about how different this pregnancy seemed from when I was carrying Zoe. She'd mention how much weight I was gaining, how tired I looked, how maybe I was too old to be having another baby at 32. Mom would chime in with observations about how difficult this pregnancy appeared to be, despite my doctor saying everything was progressing normally. Then came the baby shower suggestion. "Let us throw you a party," Mom had said during one of her daily calls. "You deserve to be celebrated, and we want to make this special for you." I was hesitant at first. The relationship with my family was still fragile, and I wasn't sure I wanted them organizing such an important event. But Ben encouraged me to accept their offer, thinking it might be a good step toward reconciliation. "Maybe this is their way of apologizing," he'd said. "Let them do this nice thing for you." So I agreed. The planning began immediately. Mom took charge of the guest list, decorations, and venue, deciding to hold it at their house where I'd grown up. Nicole volunteered to handle the food, insisting she wanted to contribute something meaningful to the celebration. "I'll make your cake," she'd announced with this bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I've been taking baking classes, and I want to make something really special for you and the baby." I should have said no. Something in her tone made me uncomfortable, but I couldn't put my finger on what exactly. Zoe, who was usually excited about any kind of party, seemed unusually quiet whenever we talked about the baby shower. When I asked her what was wrong, she'd just shrug and say she had a funny feeling about Aunt Nicole. Kids pick up on things adults miss. I should have listened to her instincts. The day of the baby shower arrived on a beautiful Saturday in April. I was 34 weeks pregnant, feeling huge and tired but excited to celebrate with family and friends. Ben helped me into my favorite maternity dress, a flowing blue number that made me feel almost elegant despite my size. Zoe was unusually clingy that morning, staying close to me and asking several times if we really had to go to Grandma and Grandpa's house. "It's just a party, sweetheart," I told her. "Everyone wants to celebrate your little brother." She nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "Mommy, promise me you'll be careful today." "Careful of what, baby?" "I don't know. Just promise me." I promised, though I had no idea what I was promising to be careful of. When we arrived at my parents' house, I was amazed by the transformation. Mom had gone all out with pink and blue decorations, balloons, and streamers everywhere. The dining room table was loaded with beautifully wrapped presents, and there had to be 30 people there, friends and family I hadn't seen in months. Everyone seemed genuinely happy to see me, offering congratulations and touching my belly to feel the baby kick. For a moment, I let myself believe that this was what family was supposed to feel like. Nicole was in her element, playing the perfect hostess, making sure everyone had drinks and appetizers. She kept catching my eye across the room and giving me these radiant smiles, and I started to think that maybe we'd finally be able to repair our relationship. The shower games were fun, if a little embarrassing. I opened gift after gift, thanking everyone for their generosity. Ben stood beside me, taking pictures and looking proud. Even Zoe seemed to be enjoying herself, playing with some of the younger kids who were there. Then it was time for cake. Nicole disappeared into the kitchen and returned with the most elaborate cake I'd ever seen. It was 3 tiers, decorated with intricate frosting flowers and delicate script that read "Welcome Baby Lucas." She'd even managed to create a fondant baby carriage on top. It was absolutely beautiful, and for a moment, I felt genuinely touched that she'd put so much effort into making something special for me. But I noticed something odd. Instead of setting the cake in the center of the table like normal, Nicole placed it at one end, and she'd already bent it exactly where the first slice should be cut with a small decorative flag that read "For Anna." It seemed unusually specific, but I thought maybe she just wanted the presentation to be perfect. "Oh, Nicole, it's gorgeous," I said, meaning it. "You really outdid yourself." She beamed at me from across the room, that same bright smile she'd been giving me all day. "I wanted it to be perfect for you, Anna. This is such a special day." Everyone gathered around as I picked up the knife to cut the first piece. That's when Zoe appeared at my side, tugging on my dress. I bent down so she could whisper in my ear. "Don't eat the cake," she said quietly, her voice urgent. She looked pale. "My sister made this cake." I froze, the knife halfway to the cake. Zoe was looking directly at Nicole, and I followed her gaze. My sister was indeed watching us with that bright smile, but something about her expression seemed off now that I was really looking. There was an intensity there that made me uncomfortable. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I whispered back to Zoe. But before she could answer, my parents appeared on either side of her, each taking one of her hands. "Come on, Zoe, let's get you some punch," Dad said, gently but firmly pulling her away from me. "Some children just don't know what's good for them." Mom nodded in agreement, her eyes fixed on me meaningfully. "Finally someone made a special cake just for you, Anna. Don't let it go to waste." The way they said it, the emphasis on certain words, made my blood run cold. I looked around the room and noticed that while everyone was watching expectantly, none of them had plates ready for cake. Usually, at parties like this, people would be lined up with their plates, eager for dessert. But everyone was just watching me. I looked back at Nicole, who was still smiling that bright, unnatural smile. Our eyes met across the room, and for just a split second, her mask slipped. I saw something there that made my heart race with fear. Satisfaction. Anticipation. Like she was waiting for something to happen. Zoe's words echoed in my mind, "Don't eat the cake." My daughter had never steered me wrong before. Her instincts about people were usually spot on, better than my own. And right now, every maternal instinct I had was screaming that something was very, very wrong. I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of cutting a piece for myself first, as tradition dictated, I cut a small piece and placed it on a plate, then set it aside. "You know what, I'm feeling a little nauseous right now," I announced to the room. "Baby brain, I guess. Let me serve everyone else first, and I'll have mine in a few minutes when my stomach settles." Nicole's smile faltered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly. "Oh, are you sure? I made it especially for you." "I'm sure it's delicious," I replied, forcing cheerfulness into my voice while my heart pounded. "I just need a moment." I began cutting pieces for the guests, serving everyone else first. Most people seemed perfectly happy to dig in, complimenting Nicole on how moist and flavorful the cake was. But I noticed that my parents and Nicole herself weren't eating their pieces, just pushing them around on their plates. That's when I knew for certain that something was terribly wrong. I excused myself to use the bathroom, but instead of heading upstairs, I slipped into the kitchen and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I think someone may have poisoned food at a party I'm at, I whispered, trying to keep my voice low so no one would overhear. I'm pregnant, and I think my family is trying to hurt me. Ma'am, are you in immediate danger? I don't know. I haven't eaten anything yet, but I think they're expecting me to. I'm at my parents' house. I gave the dispatcher the address. We're sending officers to your location. Stay on the line with me. Have you or anyone else consumed the food you believe is contaminated? I peered out through the kitchen doorway and saw that most of the guests were still eating their cake, laughing and chatting normally. Other people are eating it and seem fine. I think whatever it is might be specifically in the piece meant for me. Okay, do not consume any food or drink. The officers should be there in about 15 minutes. Is there somewhere safe you can wait? I stayed in the kitchen, pretending to be looking for something while keeping the dispatcher on the line. Through the doorway, I could see Nicole looking around, clearly wondering where I'd gone. My parents were also scanning the room, and I saw Dad check his watch with what looked like impatience. 15 minutes after I'd made the call, there was a sharp knock on the front door. The room went silent. Everyone looked around in confusion, except for Nicole and my parents, who suddenly looked panicked. I watched from the kitchen as Dad went to answer the door, his face pale. Mr. James Chen? I'm Officer Davis with the police department. We received a call about a possible poisoning at this address. The room erupted in confused murmurs. Guests were looking at each other with concern and bewilderment. I stepped out of the kitchen, my phone still in my hand. That was me, I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. I called the police. Nicole's face went white, then red. Anna, what are you talking about? This is insane. Is it? I walked over to where I'd left my piece of cake, untouched on the side table. Then you won't mind if the police test this cake, will you? You're being paranoid, Mom said, but her voice was shaky. Pregnancy hormones can make women irrational. Officer Davis looked between us, clearly trying to assess the situation. Ma'am, can you explain why you believe the food has been tampered with? I took a deep breath. My 8-year-old daughter warned me not to eat the cake. She said my sister looked pale when she made it. My parents were very insistent that I eat it, in a way that felt wrong. And I noticed that while they were pushing me to eat my piece, they weren't eating their own. The officer looked at the 3 plates in question. Sure enough, my parents' pieces were barely touched, and Nicole's was completely untouched despite her having cut the cake 20 minutes earlier. I'd like to have this tested, I continued. And if you find nothing wrong, I'll apologize for wasting everyone's time. Officer Davis called for backup and a detective. Within an hour, my parents' house had been transformed into a crime scene. The remaining cake was carefully packaged and taken away for analysis. Nicole, Mom, and Dad were all questioned separately. Most of the party guests left, confused and concerned. A few close friends stayed to support me, including my neighbor Mrs. Patricia Williams, who offered to take Zoe home so she wouldn't have to witness whatever was about to unfold. The detective, a woman named Detective Parker, was thorough and kind. She took my statement, documenting everything from the family history of resentment over the inheritance to Zoe's warning about the cake. Your daughter's instincts may have saved your life, she told me. Children often pick up on subtle cues that adults miss or rationalize away. While we waited for the test results, Detective Parker had me walk through every interaction I'd had with my family since announcing the pregnancy. The pattern became clearer as I recounted each incident. Tell me about the baking classes your sister mentioned, she said, taking notes. That was the first I'd heard of them. Nicole never showed any interest in baking before. She used to joke that she could barely make toast without burning it. The realization hit me as I spoke. She must have been learning specifically for this. Detective Parker nodded grimly. Premeditation. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. As we talked, more details emerged that I dismissed at the time but now seemed sinister. Nicole had been asking oddly specific questions about my pregnancy symptoms, my doctor's appointments, even my birth plan. She'd seemed particularly interested in my due date and whether I'd had any complications. She kept asking if I was having any heart palpitations or irregular heartbeat, I remembered. She said she'd read that was common in late pregnancy and wanted to make sure I was monitoring it closely. The detective's pen stopped moving. That's very specific. Digitalis affects heart rhythm. She was potentially setting up a cover story for why you might have cardiac issues. My blood ran cold. The level of calculation involved was staggering. This wasn't just about wanting my inheritance. This was about creating the perfect murder disguised as a pregnancy complication. There's something else, I said, remembering another odd conversation. About 3 weeks ago, Nicole asked me if Ben and I had updated our wills since Zoe was born. When I said we hadn't gotten around to it yet, she seemed pleased. She said something about how important it was to take care of these things, especially with a new baby coming. Detective Parker looked up from her notes. Did she offer to help you find a lawyer? Actually, yes. She recommended someone, but I never followed up. I was too busy with work and preparing for the baby. I paused, thinking. Do you think that lawyer might have been? We'll check into it. If your sister was planning your death, she'd want to know exactly how your assets would be distributed. The conversation was interrupted by Detective Parker's phone. She stepped away to take the call, and I could hear her speaking in low, serious tones. When she returned, her expression was grim. The preliminary test results are in, she said. The cake slice intended for you contained digitalis, as we suspected. But there's more. We also found traces of it in the mixing bowls and utensils in your sister's kitchen. She wasn't careful about cleaning up. I felt sick. How much was in the cake? Enough to cause severe cardiac distress in a healthy adult. In a pregnant woman. She trailed off, but I understood. It would have killed both me and the baby. The medical examiner will provide the exact timeline, but based on the concentration, you likely would have experienced cardiac symptoms within 30 to 60 minutes of consumption. Even if emergency services had been called immediately, the chances of saving both you and the baby would have been minimal. The weight of how close I'd come to dying hit me like a physical blow. If Zoe hadn't warned me, if I hadn't trusted her instincts, I'd be dead. My unborn son would be dead. Zoe would be an orphan, raised by Ben, who would be devastated by the loss of his wife and child. Mrs. Chen, are you all right? Detective Parker asked, noticing my distress. I can't believe they actually tried to kill me. My own parents. My sister. People I've known my entire life. I know this is difficult to process. Family-involved crimes are among the hardest cases we handle because they shatter fundamental assumptions about trust and safety. She was right. I kept expecting to wake up from this nightmare, to find out it was all a terrible misunderstanding. But the evidence was overwhelming. What happens now? I asked. We're still questioning your family members separately. Your sister has requested a lawyer, as have your parents. But the physical evidence is strong, and we have multiple witnesses to their behavior at the party. As if on cue, there was a knock on the door. Another officer entered and whispered something to Detective Parker. Her eyebrows rose slightly. Interesting development, she said after the officer left. Your neighbor, Mrs. Patricia Williams, came forward with some information. She said she witnessed your sister digging in your grandmother's garden about a month ago. Grandma Rose's garden? I was confused. Why would that matter? Your grandmother grew foxglove plants. Beautiful purple flowers, but extremely toxic. Mrs. Williams said she saw Nicole harvesting some of the plants and thought it was odd because she knew Nicole wasn't much of a gardener. Another piece clicked into place. Nicole asked me for the key to Grandma's house a few weeks ago. She said she wanted to pick up some family photos for a scrapbook she was making. I thought it was sweet that she was finally accepting Grandma's death and wanting to preserve memories. Instead, she was harvesting the poison she needed to kill you. The calculated nature of the plot kept revealing new layers. Nicole hadn't just decided to poison me on a whim. She'd spent weeks, maybe months, planning every detail. She'd learned to bake specifically to make the murder weapon. She'd researched digitalis and identified a source. She'd manipulated me into trusting her with the cake while ensuring our parents controlled the environment where it would be served. Detective Parker, can I ask you something? Of course. In your experience, do people like this? Do they feel remorse? Or are they just angry they got caught? She considered the question carefully. In cases involving family members and financial motives, I found that the perpetrators often feel justified in their actions. They convince themselves that they're righting some perceived wrong or taking what rightfully belongs to them. True remorse is rare, especially when the plan was this elaborate. Her words were sobering but not surprising. Nicole had always been skilled at justifying her bad behavior, at painting herself as the victim even when she was clearly in the wrong. I doubted prison would change that fundamental aspect of her personality. The preliminary test results came back within hours, confirming our worst fears. The cake slice that had been intended for me contained a significant amount of digitalis, a compound found in foxglove plants that can cause severe heart problems and death, especially dangerous for pregnant women. The amount was carefully calculated. Enough to cause a medical emergency that would likely result in losing the baby and possibly my own life, but potentially not enough to be immediately fatal, making it look like a tragic pregnancy complication rather than murder. What they didn't realize was that their plan was fundamentally flawed from a legal standpoint. Even if I had died, Nicole wouldn't have inherited anything. As my husband, Ben would have been my primary heir, followed by Zoe. Nicole's understanding of inheritance law was completely wrong, but her greed and jealousy had blinded her to this crucial detail. Nicole broke down during questioning and confessed everything. She'd been planning this for months, ever since I'd announced my pregnancy. In her twisted mind, if I lost the baby and died from complications, the inheritance would pass to her as my closest living relative. She had completely misunderstood inheritance law, not realizing that Ben and Zoe would inherit everything, not her. Her plan was not only evil but also legally impossible. My parents hadn't just known about the plan, they'd helped. Dad had researched the digitalis and how much would be needed. Mom had insisted on holding the baby shower at their house to control the environment. They'd all worked together to make sure I would eat that cake, never questioning Nicole's flawed understanding of how inheritance actually works. The only thing they hadn't counted on was Zoe's intuition and my decision to trust my daughter over my own family. The arrests made local news. Family charged in attempted murder plot at baby shower. The story was picked up by several regional outlets, and suddenly everyone in town knew what had happened. The legal proceedings were swift but thorough. Nicole was charged with attempted murder and conspiracy. My parents were charged as accessories and co-conspirators. All three were denied bail due to the premeditated nature of the crime and the danger they posed to me and my unborn child. During the discovery phase, more disturbing details emerged. Investigators found that Nicole had been researching digitalis poisoning for months, visiting websites about plant toxins and even checking out library books about poisonous plants. She'd created fake email accounts to ask questions on gardening forums about safely handling foxglove plants. Most chilling was what they found on my father's computer. He'd been researching inheritance laws, specifically looking into what happens when a primary beneficiary dies before updating their will. He'd even contacted a probate attorney, ostensibly asking hypothetical questions about estate distribution. The prosecution painted a clear picture of a months-long conspiracy. This wasn't a crime of passion or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was calculated, premeditated murder planned by people who were supposed to love and protect me. Their defense attorneys tried various strategies. Nicole's lawyer attempted to argue temporary insanity brought on by grief over losing the inheritance. My parents' attorney suggested they'd been manipulated by Nicole and didn't understand the full scope of her plan. But the evidence was overwhelming. The digital trail, the physical evidence, the witness testimony from the party guests who'd observed their suspicious behavior, all painted a clear picture of guilt. The most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source. During the investigation, police had interviewed Nicole's ex-boyfriend, a man named David whom she'd dated briefly the previous year. He came forward to report a conversation they'd had about my inheritance. She was obsessed with Anna getting everything, David testified. She talked about it constantly, saying it wasn't fair, that she was the older daughter and should have inherited the house and money. She said Anna had manipulated their grandmother, turned her against the family. But the most chilling part of his testimony was what came next. She asked me hypothetical questions about whether I thought people could get away with murder if they made it look like natural causes. She seemed particularly interested in pregnancy complications and how common they were. When I told her those were weird questions and it made me uncomfortable, she laughed and said she was just curious about crime shows on TV. But it didn't feel like casual curiosity. David had broken up with Nicole shortly after that conversation, feeling uncomfortable with her obsessive hatred toward me and her increasingly strange questions about death and inheritance. He'd initially hesitated to contact police, but seeing the news coverage convinced him it was important to come forward. His testimony established that Nicole had been contemplating murder for at least a year, long before I'd even announced my pregnancy. The pregnancy had simply provided her with the perfect opportunity to make my death look natural. During the sentencing phase, the prosecution presented victim impact statements from me, Ben, and even Zoe, though hers was read by a court-appointed advocate to protect her privacy. But my revenge was just beginning. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal meetings, media attention, and processing the trauma of what had happened. Ben took time off work to be with me, and we arranged for counseling to help us deal with the psychological impact of the betrayal. Zoe was struggling too. She kept asking if she'd done something wrong by telling me not to eat the cake. We reassured her over and over that she'd been brave and smart, that she'd saved lives by speaking up. But I could see the weight of it in her 8-year-old eyes. "Mommy, why did they want to hurt you?" she asked one night as I tucked her into bed. "How do you explain that level of cruelty to a child? How do you tell your daughter that some people can be consumed by greed and jealousy to the point where they'll commit murder? Sometimes grown-ups make very bad choices because they want things that don't belong to them," I said carefully. "It doesn't mean you did anything wrong, and it doesn't mean you're not safe now. But they're my family too," she said quietly. "Does that mean I'm bad like them?" My heart broke. "Oh, sweetheart, no. You are nothing like them. You're kind and brave and good. You saved me and your baby brother because you have a good heart. That's who you really are. The media attention was overwhelming at first. Local news stations wanted interviews, newspaper reporters called constantly, and social media was buzzing with the story. Pregnant woman nearly poisoned by family at baby shower was trending on several platforms. I decided to give one interview to the local news station because I wanted people to understand the importance of trusting children's instincts and recognizing that domestic violence can come from unexpected sources. If my daughter hadn't warned me, I'd be dead, I said on camera. Children see things adults miss because they haven't learned to rationalize away their gut feelings. When a child tells you something doesn't feel right, listen to them. The interview went viral. I started receiving messages from other women who'd had similar experiences with toxic family members, people who'd been dismissed when they tried to report abuse from relatives, parents who'd learned to trust their children's instincts about adults. One message particularly stood out. It was from a woman named Carol whose teenage daughter had warned her that her brother was acting weird around her. Carol had initially dismissed it as teenage drama, but something about the message made her dig deeper. She discovered her brother had been secretly filming her daughter changing clothes. Because she listened to her child, she was able to stop the abuse and get her brother prosecuted. Your story gave me the courage to share mine, Carol wrote. Thank you for showing that family loyalty doesn't mean protecting predators. The support was overwhelming and healing, but I also received some disturbing messages. There were people who seemed to sympathize with Nicole and my parents, who suggested I must have done something to deserve their hatred. Some accused me of making up the whole story for attention or money. The worst were the messages suggesting that I was somehow responsible for tearing the family apart by calling the police. As if I should have quietly eaten the poisoned cake to keep the peace. Those messages reminded me why I needed to seek justice, not just for myself and my children, but for everyone who'd ever been told to forgive and forget when family members tried to harm them. See, inheriting Grandma Rose's estate hadn't just given me financial security. It had also given me connections and resources that I was now ready to use. Grandma had been well respected in the community, involved in numerous charitable organizations and social groups. She built relationships with lawyers, business owners, and local politicians of her decades of community involvement. I started making phone calls. First, I contacted every business that employed any member of my family. Nicole worked as a Beneding coordinator at a local firm. My dad was a manager at a regional bank. My mom worked part-time at an upscale boutique. I didn't have to say much. Just mentioned that they might want to look into the recent criminal charges against their employees. All three were fired within a week. Then I reached out to their social circles. My parents belonged to a country club and several community organizations. I let the right people know what had happened, expressing my deep sadness and disappointment that my own family had tried to kill me and my unborn child. The social ostracism was swift and complete. Decades of friendships evaporated overnight. They were removed from club memberships and organization boards. Invitations to social events stopped coming. But I wasn't done. My parents had a mortgage on their house, and Dad's employment at the bank had been a significant factor in their loan approval. With his termination and the criminal charges, the bank began foreclosure proceedings. They couldn't make the payments without his income, and no one would hire any of them with pending attempted murder charges. I used some of my inheritance to hire the best criminal attorney in the state to work with the prosecutor, making sure that every detail of their crime was thoroughly documented and that they received the maximum possible sentences. Nicole got 15 years for attempted murder. My parents each got 8 years as accessories. Their lawyer tried to argue for reduced sentences based on their previously clean records and family circumstances, but the judge was horrified by the premeditated nature of the crime and the fact that they targeted a pregnant woman. The judge's words during sentencing stayed with me. This court has rarely seen such a calculated and cold-blooded attempt at murder, made worse by the fact that it was perpetrated by the people who should have been celebrating and protecting the defendant. The betrayal of family trust, combined with the targeting of a pregnant woman and her unborn child, represents a level of depravity that demands the maximum sentence allowable by law. During the sentencing hearing, Nicole finally showed her true colors. Instead of expressing remorse, she screamed at me that I'd stolen everything that should have been hers, that I was selfish and ungrateful, and that she wished the plan had worked. The outburst was so violent that the bailiffs had to restrain her. As they dragged her from the courtroom, she continued screaming obscenities at me, blaming me for destroying the family and ruining her life. Judge Harrison was clearly disgusted. The defendant's complete lack of remorse and her continued threats against the victim only confirmed that this court made the correct decision regarding sentencing. Mrs. Nicole Chen, you are a danger to society and to your own family members. My parents were quieter, but no less bitter. Dad muttered something about ungrateful children and family loyalty. Mom just stared at me with hatred in her eyes, as if I was the one who had betrayed them rather than the other way around. In her final statement to the court, Mom actually said, "I don't understand why Anna couldn't just share the inheritance like a good sister would. None of this would have happened if she'd just been fair from the beginning." The prosecutor was quick to respond. "Your Honor, the defendant seems to believe that attempted murder is a reasonable response to an inheritance dispute. This demonstrates a complete inability to accept responsibility for her actions and suggests she would pose a continued threat to the victim if released." I felt nothing but relief when they were led away in handcuffs. For the first time in months, I could breathe freely, knowing they couldn't hurt me or my children anymore. Lucas was born healthy and beautiful 6 weeks later. Ben and I updated our wills immediately, leaving everything to Zoe and Lucas, with provisions that excluded any family members who had been convicted of crimes against us. The house my parents lost to foreclosure? I bought it at auction for a fraction of its value. I donated it to a local organization that provides temporary housing for women escaping domestic violence. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in town. Nicole's former job? The Benetting firm was one of Grandma Rose's old clients. They offered me a consulting position, which I accepted. I now help businesses develop safety protocols to protect employees from workplace violence and harassment. But perhaps the sweetest revenge came from an unexpected source. 2 years after the trial, I received a letter from Nicole in prison. She was asking for money for her commissary account and legal fees for an appeal. She claimed that she was sorry, that prison had given her time to think, and that she hoped we could rebuild our relationship. I wrote back with a single sentence, "You made your choice when you tried to kill me and my son." Then I forwarded her letter to the parole board as evidence that she still felt entitled to my forgiveness and support, demonstrating a lack of genuine remorse that should factor into any future parole decisions. Her appeal was denied. She won't be eligible for parole for another 8 years. Today, Zoe is 10 and Lucas is 2. They're both healthy, happy children who know they have a mother who will always trust their instincts and protect them from anyone who means them harm, even family. Ben and I have built a beautiful life together, surrounded by friends who chose to be family rather than relatives who happen to share our blood. We've learned that the people who truly love you would never hurt you, and that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who share your DNA. Zoe still remembers that day at the baby shower, though we've tried to shield both kids from the worst details of what their aunt and grandparents attempted. When she's older, we'll tell her the whole truth about how her quick thinking and brave words saved not just my life, but her little brother's life too. She often asks why Grandma and Grandpa and Aunt Nicole can't come to family dinners anymore. We tell her that some grown-ups make very bad choices that hurt people, and when that happens, they have to face consequences for their actions. Like when I hit Tommy at school and had to sit in timeout? She asked once. Similar, I told her, but grown-up consequences last much longer because grown-ups should know better. She nodded solemnly. "I'm glad I told you not to eat the cake, Mommy." "Me too, baby girl." "Me too." Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't listened to Zoe that day. If I'd ignored her warning and eaten that cake. I probably would have collapsed within an hour, been rushed to the hospital, and likely lost Lucas. I might have died myself. Nicole and my parents would have played the grieving family, accepting condolences for the tragic loss. They might have gotten away with murder disguised as pregnancy complications. But Zoe's intuition and my decision to trust my daughter over my birth family changed everything. Justice was served, and now they're paying the price for their betrayal in ways they never imagined. The best revenge isn't just making your enemies pay for what they've done to you. It's building a life so beautiful and fulfilling that their absence from it becomes a blessing rather than a loss. I learned that family isn't about blood relation. It's about love, loyalty, trust, and protection. Real family would never try to poison you at your baby shower. Real family celebrates your happiness instead of trying to destroy it. Nicole wanted my inheritance, my house, my security. Instead, she got a prison cell and the knowledge that her greed and jealousy cost her everything. My parents wanted to support their golden child and restore what they saw as the natural order. Instead, they lost both daughters and will spend their remaining healthy years behind bars. And me? I have everything they try to take away from me, plus the satisfaction of knowing that justice was served and my children are safe from the people who should have protected them but chose to harm them instead. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, raising your children with love, and making sure that those who try to hurt you face the full consequences of their actions. That cake was meant to be the end of my story. Instead, it became the beginning of my real life, surrounded by people who actually love me and freed from the toxic family members who never deserved a place in my children's lives. I hope Nicole thinks about that every day in her prison cell. I hope she remembers how close she came to succeeding, and how a child's whispered warning brought her whole plan crashing down. But honestly, I don't think about them much anymore. I'm too busy living the beautiful life they tried to take away from me, proving every day that the best revenge is success, happiness, and the love of people who would never dream of hurting you. They made their choice that day when they decided to put poison in my cake. I made mine when I decided to trust my daughter and call the police. I think we can all agree on who made the better choice.